Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. I'm your host, Manoj Tandon, and today we are honored to have a great guest join us. He is Tim Chase. Tim is a field CISO, a professional speaker, an author, an ethical hacker. He is a certified application security engineer. He's also a LinkedIn learning instructor who writes training modules about DevOps and DevSecOps. Tim is an expert at resolving challenging security incidents with a short turnaround time. He's a graduate of Tennessee Tech and the University of Phoenix. Welcome to the show, Tim. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Manoj. I appreciate it.
So, Tim, you have quite a background there, and there's a host of topics that we want to try and cover today. I hope we can get through them all in the next hour or so. But I'm going to start this off with a topic that we every day hear about in the news, and that's ransomware. It seems to be pervasive and we have an extensive audience. Unfortunately, a lot of them have had direct personal experience of this topic, specifically ransomware as a service. What do you shed some light on this topic for us? Where do you see ransomware going? How is it evolving? And who is it impacting?
I mean, I think you kind of said it in your question there. So if I think back to ransomware when it first started, we used to see it kind of very targeted, right? The bad guys out there would find corporations that they wanted to go after. They would find people who had the money, or maybe they wanted some of their data, and they would be very targeted. But I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing kind of that shift to ransomware as a service, where you've got someone who builds the actual ransomware themselves, and then they kind of, for a percentage, will give it out to other groups, and then they just get a cut of what they get back. And so, because of how easy it is, I think we're starting to see it be kind of work downstream in the not just the enterprises anymore, but it's working down to the middle tier and the small business, right? And so I think one of the reasons behind that obviously is just kind of the pervasiveness of the digital era that we live in, right? Even small and medium businesses are moving a lot of things online. They're using more cloud services. So I think that we're going to continue to see it be not necessarily be a targeted attack per se, but I think it's just an opportunity for them, right? Because they can look and they can see, just do some scans and find out where maybe you have open ports, where they have servers that are exposed, where they can find the credentials that have been hacked, right? And they just use that kind of as a target of opportunity.
Yep.
So I think we're just going to kind of see it be less targeted towards specific enterprises, and then more just kind of targets of opportunity, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And when they're looking at opportunity and a business is looking at their exposure, is there not an element of where they may fit in the supply chain of whatever they are providing, right? Because we remember the Target breach happened from an HVAC contractor.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen that a few times, right? There was if you look at another incident that we saw, I think last year, with one of the oil pipelines, right? It was breached through another contractor and like that. And so if you take the other spin on it, that tends to be more kind of the third party risk, where we see people get, that's still targeted by specific, I would say, adversaries that are looking to make waves, right? So there's still people that are going to go out there and have methods of opportunity where they say, you know what, if I stop these people, I know that they will pay. And so we will, I think, continue to see that as well, where they'll find their way in through third parties, because maybe the third parties don't have the level of security that the larger enterprises do. So they'll continue to find their way through HVAC contractors or whatever it happens to be some sort of third party.
You're exactly right, Tim, and you make a great point, and I think our listeners, that's something that they should make a note of. Just because you're a small business and you may feel that you don't have a target on you, You should look at who your clients are and are they a target and where you fit in their supply chain.
Hmm.
And that may be a very valid reason for you to become a target in addition to people doing things opportunistically, of course.
And that's a whole other area that we could really get into, right? The whole third party security, because that's a whole other risk that we're seeing more and more these days. Not just like in the ransomware vein, but that's the way that people target to get inside larger organizations. And so, third party risk is a huge topic in amongst itself. In everywhere from our government all the way through the private sector.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll try and get to that. I hope we get a little bit of time here because there's just so many things that we want to get through to with you. So when you look at a lot of organizations have started to build out their own portals. They've built their own applications. There's custom work going on that helps them propagate their goods and services electronically in the market space. A lot of those things are built on open source code.
Hmm.
How can they actually go about ensuring that those applications are secure? What's your advice for that?
Um, yeah, it's tough, right? Because if you think about it, you could have anybody contributing to these projects. The projects themselves try and do a good job of utilizing maybe the internal security practices that places like GitHub have. And
Yeah.
then also using kind of the community review of the source code that's contributed. So they try and do it that way. But I think a couple of pieces of advice that I always give um, is obviously number one, ensure that you're keeping it updated. And that may sound simple, but over and over again, we see somebody install something and then never go back to look to see that if there are any updates, and everything. Um, if you're running an open source project that is hopefully maintained, which is another point,
Yeah.
right? Make sure that you're using something that is maintained regularly, not just, you look at the last update and it's like from a year ago. Um,
Yeah.
so look at that and keep it updated because as things like Log4j and others come out, you're going to have members of the community that are going to go back up there and update it and push that out. So that's the number one piece of advice that I would give. But I think number two is uh, I don't trust anything, right? And I think that if you go back to kind of one of the core tenets of security 101 when you're first learning security is defense in depth, right? And so
Right.
um, obviously make sure that whatever open source you're running, make sure that you have the proper monitoring in place, the logging in place, the antivirus EDR sort of protections in place as well, wherever you're running it, and then um, make sure that you're depending on what you're running, make sure your permissions are set correctly, right? So don't just install um, this software just right in your network, but try and limit where it can talk to, right? Make sure that you don't if it only has to talk to a certain amount of servers, then kind of use network access controls to limit it, right? Don't just give it pervasive access. So use some sort of segmentation as well to make to it to kind of understand that
So that sounds like instrument the heck out of it as much as
much as you can.
that as much as you really can, because I heard you say, EDR. Some of these tools may not be available to the small business crowd, but still, they need to figure out ways of logging, of instrumenting. They can certainly do privileged account management, even if they don't have technology. There's processes you can put in place to make sure that you are giving privileged access not to everything. I can't tell you the number of databases that we've come across that still have their original factory
Password
passwords.
passwords. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right? So make sure that you don't use and leave any of the defaults, right? Make sure that you change all of that when you're doing the install because the defaults are out there for everyone to see for sure.
That's exactly right. And in fact, I've seen it like in companies of a good size where people are Googling what the default password on their database is so they can get into it. I'm like, all right, this is a little bit of a security risk here, guys.
And,
You might want to do.
and I don't think you have to have like any of the high priced fancy EDR solutions that a lot of enterprises have, but even from a small and medium sized business, um, most small and medium sized businesses, I would say they may use things like Microsoft, right? Microsoft does a pretty
Yeah,
good job of catering to that particular group. And if you look at their security solutions that they include these days, I mean they're pretty good. Like their Defender, and a lot of
oh yeah,
their CASB, just the different things that you can use just as a part of um, running servers through them or having email through them that they include are actually pretty good. So it doesn't have to be anything, high price that you would find at an enterprise level per se.
yeah. And Microsoft's done. There's published guidelines on securing Microsoft 365, which is ubiquitous out there.
Hmm.
Something that we see is a lot of times, it's just reading through that, and m- there's a lot of misconfigurations out there that lead to security gaps, and they're not intentional. It's just doing the work, right? Reading about it and then actually doing the work and
And,
executing it.
and sometimes, in the SMB space, it's a matter of expertise and workers as well, right? So sometimes you have one guy who um, has to wear several different hats, right? And so it's not intentional
Right.
that they leave things like that. But, Microsoft has done a pretty good job of, being able to run reports, giving you like Security Center and some other tools that you can use to make sure that you haven't left anything open and your ports aren't open and that you have it configured correctly. You're right.
So, Tim, what in your experience have you seen as like the top three causes of security incidents occurring that you've come across?
Um, so I would say number one, and it's a little bit trite potentially at this point, but it's probably trite for a reason. I mean, phishing is still a thing, right? I hate to say that it's not, but um,
Oh
if
yeah.
you, I was just looking at the news earlier today, and there was a company that, like two of the companies that I've seen that have gotten a lot of venture capital funding have been email security companies, right? And
Yep.
at first that kind of surprised me because there's a couple of pretty established ones out there, including Microsoft themselves, which has a pretty robust email security solution. But it's still a problem out there, right? And whether it's um, there's a bunch of different forms of phishing, right? It could be just the classic gift card scheme where they get an email
Yeah.
and they send it on and they say, hey, Manoj, this is the CEO and I'm too busy right now to go do this, but I need you to go get some gift cards for me and send me the numbers on the gift cards, right? But I can't talk on the phone right now, right? So that level of phishing, but from a breach perspective, it's still super common to use open source reconnaissance on LinkedIn. Find the people. Maybe you want to get into their cloud, so you'll find some of the cloud administrators, or maybe you want to get into Office 365, so you'll look
Yep.
around and find out who could potentially be managing and have access to O365 in a company, and try and fish them or get in through HR or something like that, right? So that's still a very common way because typically, um, we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but a lot of times still, once you get into a network, like you're in. There's not a lot like segmentation
Right.
can be hard, and so that just finding a way in, and then you can kind of pivot from there, right? So I would say phishing um, is one cause. Uh, I put access control as another one because I feel like,
Okay.
um, especially with especially in the maybe the small and medium sized business where you're wearing multiple hats. Sometimes we don't do a great job of um, we just kind of give everybody access because they need it to do their job, but maybe we never go back
Right.
and review if they still need the access. Maybe you've grown and their position has changed, or just over provisioning, over permissioning is a big is a
And,
big deal.
and do you see along that note deprovisioning as still being an issue
Hmm.
that's persistent out there?
I do both in the small and the medium sized businesses. I was giving. Um, I was given another webinar the other week, and I have an example that I use in there of a large enterprise of somebody who, in their cloud environment, left and went on to a different job, and then about a year later, all of a sudden, this company's software crashed, right? And what it found out was the guy who had left provisioned a bunch of infrastructure because he still had permissions. He crashed the entire software stack and cost about $1.5 million in damage. Whether he meant to do that or not is
Wow.
inconsequential, but they had to take him to court and kind of give some of their money
Oh,
back. So it's very much a problem, and um, that's why I think that. Um, it's very common that, especially when people leave, we don't always go and clean up. That's why things like Okta and single sign-on are really still kind of killing it in the market. But also, it's also a kind of an issue with insider threats, with people kind of being able to get to different areas because maybe their jobs change, and they never get access taken away. Not just if they leave the company. So still a very big problem.
yeah, that's we've seen that quite a bit. We've seen that in healthcare where you see a lot of the individual providers in the environment are actually subcontractors in many instances, and a lot of them moonlight at different
Mm-hmm.
organizations. So their permissions can, I mean, their roles can even actually change during the day, where there may be an employee at one facility, but then may moonlight in the ER at another facility, right?
I,
And those,
it's tough.
I'm
It's
sorry, go
tough,
ahead.
right? And it's not because people are lazy, but it's hard to do, right? It's hard to manage permissions. It's hard to um, uh, provision. When somebody comes on, give them exactly what they need, and then manage the transition of roles. It's just a hard thing that requires resources and software to do.
And you mentioned, like putting in some kind of a single sign-on solution with lifecycle
Mhm.
management would probably help automate portions of it. But they should, again, access control, privileged account management. Look at those user lists. Try and limit it to who really needs access. Limit access, and I think keeping things simple. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of organizations get carried away with immense complexity and role definitions, and that may come back to haunt them at a later
It
point in time.
definitely will. But that's why one of the first, like if I'm building a cyber program, one of my first hires typically is like a GRC person, right? Because inside of a good GRC program, even on a small team, um, I build kind of an audit function in there, right? Where every 6 months, every quarter, you're going back and you're looking to make sure people are deprovisioned. Like you're looking for and kind of going back and making sure that the processes you have in place work. Like it's a super important function.
That's really cool. Yeah, you're the first CISO we've had on the program that's actually mentioned that, where you're starting it off with the GRC function. It wouldn't have occurred
I
to
think
me
the last
to
time
do
I
it that
started
way.
a cyber function, I think they were the number 3 or 4 hire, I think, something like that. So it wasn't the first. Typically, it's like an engineer or somebody pretty technical, but it wasn't way far down, right? It is important because without getting off track too much, but like it's a core function to be able to go through as your company grows. Even smaller companies are typically getting ISO or SOC 2 certified, and having that GRC function is kind of a core tenet of being able to do that.
So you mentioned two items there, in terms of
Mhm.
phishing, in terms of access control. What's a third one that you see
Um, it's
that's a
it's
source?
it's application security. Like I know we touched on it with the library stuff, but I've been doing AppSec now for I think 20 years, if I did my math on the fly right,
Wow.
right. So in 20 years ago, we were finding SQL injection, and guess what? We're still finding SQL injection today, right?
SQL,
So
yeah,
uh,
very.
it's still. I think the main thing that's changed, if I look at over the course of the years, is our languages have gotten smarter. Where SQL injection quite isn't as easy to do as it used to be, but our pervasive use of open source has really has really caused some some different risks, right? Because if you think about a couple of the ones that have happened lately, Log4j is kind of the one that's been talked about so much lately,
Yep.
but uh, you know, everybody could have done everything correctly from their perspective and perform testing on their code, but in the end, the weakest link was something you didn't even write, right? And so much code these days is open source that you don't have any control over. So application security is still a big one for me, even if it's not your code specifically. Um, it could be somebody else's code that you just reuse.
Yeah, if someone's built a portal out there, I would highly advise them to have their websites pen, for lack of a better word, penetration tested, but it's really application
Mm-hmm.
testing. They really should have a deep dive into that because the findings might actually surprise them as to how easy it is. I remember there was a I forget who put it out, but there was a tweet. It was about a fellow in a car, and he had actually put a SQL injection query on the front of his
Oh, that's brilliant.
bumper, and when he drove past the speed cameras in the UK, it actually
Did it
worked.
really?
It,
Oh, that's a fantastic
it
story.
did. You got to look at you got to look it up. I was like, wow, I didn't think of that, but that's pretty neat. Yeah, if you look it up,
I'm gonna
you'll
Google that
find
when
it.
we're done.
It's somewhere out there, but it's an example, right? People should absolutely test the
And
heck out of their
it don't let, like,
applications.
when I built a couple of things like with my side company in the past, and that was just part of my budget. I had a guy who I know would do it for me on the side, and it should just be part of your budget. And there are ways to do it. If you're, you know, it doesn't have to be a big $100,000 price tag to do a pen test, right? There are pen test as a service companies out there that are very reasonably priced for for smaller businesses. You don't have to go for the big names that'll charge you six figures.
And that actually leads right into the next topic. When you talk about six figures, big price tags, a lot of small medium businesses, and I'm saying those companies that are around 2,000
Mhm.
employees or less, anywhere from 30 to 2,000 people, they get scared. There is an anxiety about the amount of spend that, or perception of about the amount of spend that would be required to build a robust cybersecurity program that does defense in depth. How would you advise that segment of the market to really look at building a program? What would you do for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of being pragmatic with a solution. Um, I do cloud security in my day job, and I get this question even quite a bit there. Like, holy crap! Like, where do you start in cloud security, right? And so I tend to just say, start small by understanding kind of the scope of the problem. And so, what I have done, and what I would probably advise someone to do, would be to just go through like an open source framework, like the NIST CSF, right? Open source framework that you can
Yep.
download, and just go through and kind of do an audit of yourself, right? You first. And you don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to do this. And just kind of understand what you have in place and what you don't have in place. Because most likely, if you're starting a security program from scratch, you're not starting security from scratch. Like your Linux admins probably have a decent
Yep.
security posture going on. Those guys, are pretty smart usually when it comes to that. Your Windows guys are likely using like Defender, and they got the firewall set up. You probably have some level of security to
Level of
start with.
security.
So
Yeah.
it's helped to understand um, just where you're at from kind of an established framework. And so I would just start with the NIST CSF. That's where I started before we had like SOC 2 and things like that in my previous roles. And then once you kind of have that filled out to kind of understand where your gaps are, then I would start to know to look at like where's my biggest risk, right? So is my biggest risk um, my data? Like if I'm maybe a small healthcare company, but I've got some patient data or I have some PHI, like that's going to be where you're going to focus your time and money. And how do I take the framework that I just looked at and look to secure that, right? Don't try and secure everything at once, but just kind of take it, find out what's the most important thing for me to secure. Um, if you're a small size business that's in the cloud, where you do have data stored and exposed there, then probably securing your
Yeah.
cloud is going to be where you're going to start, because that's the most um, that's just the most obvious place.
So let me ask you real quick. People who are using things like Box or
Mhm.
OneDrive or Dropbox for general storage, how secure are those environments?
I think by their nature they are secure, but it goes back to the access control, right? Um, so because a lot of times we will um, share with, if you're sharing internally, then they're fine, but a lot of times we will share externally, and then we don't control who they can share with. We forget what's there, so it's just kind of hanging out. So by the nature themselves they're secure, but by human nature they tend to get out of control um, a little bit. And uh, and so there are ways, obviously, with the reviews that we talked about earlier, that can be part of your reviews, to go back and look through the external shares and having kind of an official policy about what can be shared, what can't. Um, when you start getting a little bit smarter, just kind of give an example that I think is applicable to the SMB area. I talked about Microsoft and their tools earlier. We had put in a
Right.
process. They've got a pretty cool ability to um, monitor what you are sending out through email and also sharing in Drive. So you can say things like, if you see a social security number, like don't let that be sent through email and don't let it be stored in a Drive. Like you can set up policies like that can help control the data somewhat as well, right? And so, but inherently themselves, I don't find them to be insecure, because you can do two-factor and you can do all sorts of things these days with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, that's okay.
So sorry to
No,
put you off track, but you were
it
because that's
is.
an important one. Cloud. I mean, we see a lot. Most companies, especially in the startup space, no one's putting any infrastructure on prem. It's all
Yeah,
cloud. Why would you?
100%. Like, why would you?
Like,
Why? And we'll just build it on
mhm.
AWS instead of putting servers in a data center, right? And there are good and bad to that. But
Right.
um, and the other thing that I would say is, you don't have to. Um, Once again, like, you don't have to get the best of the breed if you're not in a place where you can quite afford it yet, right? Like, if you look at a lot of these tools at the enterprise level, I mean, they make I work in it day in and day out, and they make my head explode. Sometimes when you get these six-figure quotes back, right? And so I totally get it that if you're a 50-person company, you're probably not going to want to spend $300,000 for an application security product, right? So but that is
Right.
where I go back to open source. Like, just look for some open source stuff. Like, focus on the people first. Like, people, process, and technology. Like, focus on the people and the process first, and then you can kind of find the right technology, because there's a lot of open source out there that's well maintained. Like, if you're looking for something to do cloud security, there's a couple of
Yeah.
open source projects. Capital One used to even have one that they open sourced. Netflix.
Can you? Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say, could you mention some
I was like,
that
I
might be
just drew a
useful to
blank.
the?
But there used to be
It's
Capital
okay.
One used to have one for AWS. You could just Google Capital One and AWS security. I think Cloud Checker might still be out there. It's spelled a little bit funky. I think there's just a KR on it.
Okay.
So those are a couple
Okay.
that are out there that can help you from a cloud perspective, right? Looking for those kind of I call it cloud security posture, making sure, like, if you're in AWS, that you're secure. And same thing with application security, right? Like, if you look at um, just to kind of throw some out there, Sonar Cube is a super common one, right? And the
Okay.
cool thing about Sonar Cube is they
Yep.
have a lot of things that are no cost. Like you can go to the enterprise level and they have some cool features, but for someone in a SMB space that just wants to be able to test their Java app, like that's there at no cost, right? And there's fine sec bugs is another one that you can run from a command line that finds security in Java, um, and and so
Wow, that one I didn't know.
that's a
That
good
was a
one.
good. That's a good one.
And I go through a few of these. You mentioned the LinkedIn training, but um, if someone has any more questions, they can connect to me and I can tell them. But I go through a few of them on the continuous application security training on LinkedIn. But there's all sorts of open source. So there's ones for secret scanning, um, where you can go through, make sure you don't put any passwords in your configuration or source code. So I guess my point is. There's even from a GRC perspective, I have one up and running today that I use. It's an open source product called Iramba, which is
Okay.
ERAMBA. And they have it's open source. You can download it, compile it, build it yourself, or you can actually pay for the. They do have a full fledged enterprise version as well. But for someone who just needs to set up a GRC function to help their auditing, it's free, right? Um, so you don't have to go straight for the most expensive tools to have a good cyber program. It's really to me important to have the right people in place and the right processes in place first.
I think that's great advice. There's Gartner has their wonderful magic quadrants, and those products are applicable to a lot of people and do a lot of good things, but at the same time they may not be affordable by everyone. So what you're advising is exactly correct. Look at alternative approaches, open source tools, and thank you for providing some of those very useful tips. I think the audience is going to find them, and we'll put them in the show notes as well, um, so that people can go and link up and take a look
Sure.
at those technologies. But I want to get back to one thing. You started off with people first, and this is just me personally, it's my opinion that people are the greatest underutilized security asset in a
Mm-hmm.
company. Right. I think there's a lot of security gaps we could close if we actually educated the people, the end users, and got them involved. A lot of times what happens is they think cybersecurity is some nebulous function. It's a guy in a hoodie in the back room that's doing something. They're not in touch with it. They don't have contextual awareness of the cybersecurity problem. And at other times, a lot of policies get rolled out to them for which they don't even understand why, so they just kind of blow it off. They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Um,
You're right.
and it's not that it's malicious
It is.
intent; it's human nature. If you tend to you tend to do things that you understand and that appear logical to you. So how do we make cybersecurity logical to that end user community?
I personally, that's a good question. So, um, I think cybersecurity to actually work well as a function has to have the buy-in of everybody around you, right? So, you're to me like whenever I would push policies out, I always would bring in the team that was going to be affected or having to do the push out to get their thoughts, right? And so like if I'm going to be
Okay.
pushing out a new antivirus solution to the company, like I would bring in those particular guys, the administrators, and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're gonna do this because of the false positive rate in the previous one is not great. This is a new way of doing things. What do you think? How can we go about doing it, right? And so I'm a big believer in just not throwing stuff over the wall, but getting buy-in of everybody that you're going to be working with, right? So it's kind of goes back to what you mentioned, the education around it, um, and so I want to educate kind of everybody that I work with on why we're doing things and why it's important, just so they don't see it as a useless function or a checkbox. Um, that's my general philosophy
Right.
around it.
Yeah, we see a lot of that where some things get implemented and people just don't understand the why, and then they're like, Yeah, maybe we'll follow it, maybe we won't, and that results in a lot of gaps. And they just people, by and large, what we've seen is end users are good people. They will oblige you and do the right thing if they
Hmm.
understand the why behind it, and that's and I would encourage companies to really have that as part of a good cybersecurity program, is have some end user
Yeah,
education. You know,
you're right.
what are
A
we
couple of
talking
a
about?
couple of points. I always like to when I'm rolling something out, whether it's application, cloud security, network, whatever. I try and find if it, is there a way to make this easier for the people that are going to be helping me, right? So, for example, when I'm doing just to use application security as an example, when I'm rolling out an application security tool, um, I don't usually go to the developers and say, "Here's the tool you have to use. Go and do it." What I do is I say, all right, let me see how I can get this in the environment that you work in. So if they code like in Visual Studio, because it's a Microsoft shop, then I'm going to make my tool work with Visual Studio so that they can continue to just kind of work in their environment, and I'm not requiring them to do extra work. So finding that's part of the communication is how can I don't want to make their job harder because they always have a bunch of stuff to do, but how can I meet them kind of where they are, and so not only do they understand, but I'm going to make it easy for them to do what I need them to do. And then the second part that you mentioned is training. I'm a big believer in cyber training for everybody. If I'm doing AppSec, like my coders are going to get application security training. If I'm dealing with network guys or server guys, like they're going to get training for Linux security, right? I'm a big believer that everybody should have some sort of security training because security is everybody's ultimately it's everybody's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. I tend to think these days as we're going faster and quicker, ultimately as you progress through a maturity process in the cyber group, I tend to think that we shift more from doers to auditors, right? Like, so ultimately, like at the very beginning, like we're going to be in their hands on keyboard running tests, but ultimately at the end, like the tool should be in the developer's hands. We just have to make sure that they're actually doing and fixing. So, if that that's why the education is so important.
That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you one other question here, and it has to do with budgets and getting back to cyber. A lot of time, cybersecurity, it generally has in the past fallen into the cost
Mm-hmm.
avoidance category, right? Have you seen companies use cybersecurity as a revenue center?
I've seen them try and do that before. It's a little bit tough. That usually comes in more enterprise level where you can do the bit like the bill back kind of models and things like that. And in the SMB space, I found it to be a little bit harder. If you're talking about like internal revenue model, um,
Well, yeah, and well, I'm thinking like if we implement good security on a e-commerce
mhm,
platform that a small business may be using it, or where that actually could not only automate. So, like for example, if there was some kind of identity management, whatever it may be, that's for external identities implemented on a company's external platform. That might enable them to then provide cloud based services to that audience. It might enable them to provide information in a secure way, all of which leading to additional sales or additional revenue
that's a
from
good way of looking
services
at it.
potentially. That's what I'm thinking about. And it's what you're
Yeah.
implementing is a security function there, but it's
That's interesting.
resulting
I
in
have not
revenue
thought about that.
for
I
the
had not
company.
seen that, but that's an interesting way of looking at it. So basically, you kind of build it, and then you kind of sell, in essence, kind of what you built to give additional revenue. I have not seen that before.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't seen discussed much out there either. But it would be, I think it's worthwhile to at least have the discussion on that and say, if we're implementing a certain set of security features, quote unquote, uh, operationally, where do they impact the revenue chain, And are they enabling aspects of that revenue chain that couldn't have been enabled if we didn't put those
I've seen it
features
a
in?
little bit differently. Like I've seen it where cybersecurity has been used to eliminate some risks that enabled us to go after more business. Meaning, um, for example, there's certain types of business you can only go after if you have NIST compliance, maybe some more governmental um, type of business, or HIPAA in the medical space. I have seen it where they have put forth the model and the maturity to get to a certain place in their cybersecurity function where it enables them to go after more business because, hey, we're NIST certified. Now we can go get these government clients, or now we're HIPAA certified. We can sign BAs and take in these healthcare folks. Like I have seen it, um, you know, that level, and it typically has been more of a compliance level perspective that allows more revenue to be generated.
Okay, very cool. Well, Tim, we're here nearing the hour. We wanted to give you a couple minutes. If there's anything you'd like to share, any books, any speaking engagements you have coming out, anything that you would like our audience to know about,
No, I think the biggest thing,
please.
I appreciate the time. If you get a chance, do check out the my courses on LinkedIn. So I've got a new revision coming out for the DevSecOps course, which kind of introduces the concept of what is DevSecOps. And then I also have one called Continuous Application Security, which takes you how can you build application security into DevOps and make it kind of more automated. So if you get a chance and either of those are interesting to you, then check those out.
And Tim, are those courses designed for a practitioner, or what level are they? Or are they an intro?
The
Who would you
the,
recommend
the
attend
application
those
security one, you
classes?
should have a little bit of background probably in AppSec, not like years, but just kind of an understanding of what application security is. It would help. But the DevSecOps one is anybody that wants to know more about DevSecOps, what it is, and how it can affect you, and how you can roll security into it. That one's kind of an intro.
Well, fantastic. Well, Tim, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we hope to have you back again sometime as things change. And would love to pick your
Sounds
brain
good.
a
Thank
little
you,
bit
Manoj.
more on
Appreciate
some
the time.
topics.